So I like to look at it from a methods perspective and the different methods you can use. And then it's a matter of, okay, we've got different methods. Let's take a look at the contracts we have and see if these contracts are to be used with a specific method, right? So it's about here's the contract. This contract calls for this kind of a method. So the methods that we have, this is methods to for calculating what's referred to as the dilution effect of earnings per share. So we're looking at what, given the contracts that I have, how much do these contracts dilute my basic earnings per share? So we're looking at the dilution effects of contracts to issue more common shares. Okay. You'll also hear people refer to this as fully diluted or just diluted earnings per share. And both the basic and this different calculation, the dilution effect calculation, both of those have to be disclosed. Both of those are required disclosures. So let's think about the different methods. Let's at least talk about the different methods, and then we'll take a look at some instruments to see how we would apply those methods. So the first method we talk about is the Treasury stock method. And this is used mostly with options and warrants and things of that nature, where the individual holding the option, the individual holding the warrant, they're not just getting the stock, right? We're not just handing them the stock. They have to actually pay cash for whatever the stock is, right? There's a strike price in the option. There is a warrant price in the warrant. And the holder of that option to get the common shares has got to pay that amount of money. It's actually going to pay that cash to the organization. And we're not talking about options that are bought in the secondary market. We're talking about options where I am going to have to issue brand new shares, or I'm going to issue shares that I have bought back that I've got in Treasury. So either way, it doesn't matter. Shares are now going to go from not outstanding to outstanding. And that's what we want to find out. So the Treasury stock method, the Treasury stock method is usually used for options, warrants, and other types of instruments where there's some kind of cash coming in. And I make that capital. I'm gonna underline it in red because that's a critical piece. The in, cash coming in. Now we're using the Treasury stock method. So what do? Well, we assume that all of these options and warrants were exercised on the first day. At the beginning of the year. Right? And if we think about exercising an option, well, how do they do that? Well, they are going to give us cash, and we're going to give them the equity. Debit cash, credit common stock. or additional paid in capital, whatever, it doesn't matter. Largely irrelevant. We're going to credit equity. Okay. What are we going to do with that cash? I mean, just don't want to blow up our balance sheet. What are we going to do with that cash? We just issued new shares. What are we going to do with the cash? Well, the assumption is and it is an assumption, right? In doing this calculation, the assumption is that cash received is used theoretically. It's not actually used because it's not actually coming in. It's the assumption that it would be coming in, right? Because we're just assuming that they were all exercised at the beginning of the year. That the cash received is used theoretically to buy back shares. Okay? Whew. So here I have to assume that I am issuing the shares, and then whatever cash I get, I have to assume that I'm buying back shares. So here, this is going to increase weighted average shares outstanding. And then this assumption is going to decrease the weighted average shares outstanding. And so what we're looking for is whatever the net is. That net change, should be an increase, right? Because if we think about this, why would anyone, and we have to, whatever we're going to buy the shares back, it is the current market rate. Okay, we're going to buy the shares back then, the current market rate. Actually, not the current market rate. I'm making a mistake here. Not the current market rate, but the average market rate during the period. And when I say the market rate, the average price of the stock during the year or the quarter or what have you. Okay, so it's the average market price. We know how much cash that we're going to get in because the exercise prices on this are stated in the contract. So we know how much cash we're going to get in. Therefore, we know how many shares will go up. And we also know, roughly, given the current market rate, how many shares we'll buy back. This net amount, this net increase, right? Because when we think about this, there's no way anyone's going to exercise these shares at a lower price, right? Or if they do, then the net is going to be negative. So this has to be a positive increase, because if it's negative, then there's no assumption that these options would be exercised, that these warrants would be exercised. Right? But this is just basically the trend. We'll talk a little bit more about that, what happens if the net is negative. Right now we're assuming the net of this is positive, that I would have theoretically issued more shares than I would have had to buy back. So we're assuming that this is positive. This net, that positive net, that would adjust our weighted average shares outstanding. So we'd have net income less the preferred dividends, and now we'd have a higher weighted average shares that would lower our basic earnings per share for the dilution effects related to anything using the Treasury stock method.